Guys, did you think I was going to abandon you and not cover the second half of Seth's Endless Space 2 review? Absolutely not. Space Conquest is my favorite video game activity. Let's get into it.
A lot of ships in this game, unique to each faction. They're all fully customizable, limited only by the type and number of modules available. Primarily, you're going to use them to intimidate your enemies into submission and to intimidate your friends into working a little harder on their friendship.
Guys, this is actually what real militaries do, in fact, do. Before Iraq and Afghanistan, the U.S. military's calling card, their raison d'etre, their reason for existence. When it comes to intimacy, we all want to feel confident. But for a lot of guys, erectile dysfunction gets in the way. This issue affects different people differently, but 52% of men will experience ED at some point in their lives. More men will experience ED than not. If this sounds like something that you've dealt with, you're going to want to hear about today's video sponsor, Roman. Roman can connect you to a licensed U.S. health provider through a teleconsultation in the comfort of your own home. If appropriate, the provider will find a treatment that's right for you and prescribe medication. The whole process is convenient and simple. So if you think that that's something that'll help you, go to getroman.com/CVR to complete your free consultation and find out if treatment is right for you. And by using my link, you get $15 off your first ED treatment. Again, that's getroman.com/CVR. And thanks again to Roman for sponsoring today's video. God, I'm sorry I butchered that French. Was to be a deterrent, to let every other potential upstart rival country know that the U.S. military could be decisive if it chose to enter any single conflict. In fact, there were debates in the 90s, right? Because obviously from the Second World War all the way till the fall of the Soviet Union, the U.S. military was designed to do primarily one thing, and that is fight the Soviet Union whenever, wherever, but especially in Western Europe. But with the fall of the Soviet Union and the recognition that Russia in the 90s was unlikely to be a hostile power vis-a-vis the United States, the U.S. military had a big conversation. They called it debating what to do with the peace dividend. The peace dividend was, of course, a term to reflect the fact that much of the military spending could now be diverted to other programs. And in some ways, we did get it. President Clinton actually, for the first time in most of our lifetimes, had a budget surplus. That's right. They didn't put the government more into debt in order to fund operations. They actually were able to, for a brief moment, pay down some of the U.S. government's debt. But the debate was, what do we do with the military, and how big does this new peacetime military have to be? And the answer was basically they decided they wanted to create a force that could fight 2 regional wars and intervene in another low-intensity conflict. So that would be something like fighting China for Taiwan, fighting Russia for another Eastern European ally, and still have enough to intervene in a Somalia or Haiti type of situation. Obviously, that plan meant that you would have to stretch your forces to the max to sustain that, but that was what the U.S. decided was necessary, and it meant that it would tell any potential adversaries that even if the U.S. military was committed to a conflict, it still would maintain enough in reserve to fight elsewhere. So it would still maintain its deterrent power.
Your only control over combat is the loadout.
The only thing that sort of bothers me that the U.S. military does that this convolutedly alludes to, the U.S. military, because of its decisive advantage, it's so big and so powerful and so numerous that allies who have like NATO agreements, alliances with the U.S., don't need to invest as much in their own defense because of how strong the U.S. is. Ultimately, countries like Germany, countries like Spain, Italy, other NATO countries, their plan to defend themselves, right, presently, again, it's extremely unlikely they would be invaded unexpectedly, but their battle plan is to stall a potential enemy until the US arrives. That's the entire battle plan, because they know that that's all their military can reasonably be expected to do. Some countries also have plans to use their existing professional military to quickly draft and train a actual fighting force. But for the vast majority, the plan in the medium term is the United States of America.
Formation and tactics used by your military. The rest is a simulation played out by the computer, where each time a ship explodes, you know the cinematic at the end of Diablo 2 where Tyrael throws his sword at the world stone and it explodes into a billion chunks of wood? Yeah, that's exactly how every ship explodes in this game. Combat.
Love it.
That is very simple. There's different weapons, which have different accuracies depending on the range of engagement. Flat cannons shred anything up close, including long-range ballistic missiles, but they bounce off armor. Lasers cut ships in half at mid-range, while beam weaponry works at every range, unless they...
What's always fascinating to me is that I understand these mechanics have to balance space combat, but the actual mechanical combat in space will not look like this. These are engagements happening at ship-like distances. But the fact is that we can see celestial bodies, even very small ones such as comets, for light years and light years out. So you're unlikely to be able to sneak up on a combat warship from any advanced civilization, any spacefaring civilization. They're going to detect you. And so the engagements will almost certainly be beyond visual range and will be, or at least beyond the human visual range, and will likely involve weapons moving at significant fractions of the speed of light. A missile moving at, say, a quarter of the speed of light, or a beam weapon, right, that's moving at the speed of light and not dissipating over distance, if such a thing were possible.
They have shields. You can absolutely get away with filling every slot with a flat cannon, choosing the default tactics card, and still win every fight. Besides interplanetary combat, you can also directly invade. This works on the same principle, which means I'm still going to use the default tactics card, which just so happens to be preemptive orbital bombardment. Many civilians will die, but that is a...
Guys, we have discussed this in other videos. Preparing the battlefield, right? Prior to a ground invasion, softening up the opponent's defenses using artillery bombardment is a great tactic if you can sufficiently coordinate, which again, in the world of interplanetary combat, you'd think they would have, a radio. So what this would do, right, in addition to actually dealing damage to the enemy's ability to resist you, the other advantage of planetary bombardment is it forces the enemy to cover. Sometimes literally to take cover, sometimes just to redeploy from combat formations into defensive formations that are less able to resist a ground assault, right? And because you're in communication with the aircraft or the bombarding ships overhead, that the invading force is able to know exactly down to the second when the last bomb will strike. In contrast, the enemy may not. So you will know that at precisely 10:36 a.m., bombardment will stop and you will advance and charge, whereas the enemy does not know that. So as long as you maintain an intermittent schedule of bombardment, that enemy, you will be able to encounter them in their bunkers, so to speak.
Sacrifice I'm willing to make. Your chance of success depends entirely on whether or not you have replaced your troops with a mobile suit Gundam. If you conquer a system, you can choose to either spare the population or take a massive hit to your public approval rating by re-educating and reintegrating the native population into the fucking soil. Which is a good time and segue to talk about politics. In Endless Space 2, you have government, you have Senate, and you have an obligation to represent your people, which is why we have a dictatorship. Power to the masses is power to the upper classes, and any proletariat will see the wisdom of my words. Politics is all-encompassing in Endless Space 2. Any action you take, endorse, or sponsor will shift the political axis of your entire empire.
Guys, this is completely true to the real world. There is no political decision made in isolation. And here is a great example. One of the things that is almost all Western countries are dealing with right now is both the Ukraine crisis and a surging inflationary rise in prices, particularly of raw materials. And the concern is that, one, this conflict is going to further increase those price surges, right? Because they, well, are creating a shortage, an artificial shortage in the case of sanctions against Russia, and a literal shortage in the case of raw materials mined in Ukraine, given that the mines are closed due to, bombing. And so when the international community makes these sort of decisions about intervention, about supporting a side, anything like that, it's driven not just by the military situation and supporting allies or not, but it's also driven by these inflation concerns, right? Because ultimately, people vote with their pocketbooks, and all of these Western politicians need to win elections. This isn't to say it's good or bad. This is the system operating as designed, and it's important to understand that the very few political issues are in isolation. Everything is interconnected to everything else, and everything about our lives is in its way political.
As with real life, the opinions of your people are difficult to manage, their motivations difficult to guess. There's a total of 6 different party ideologies you can choose to support, each two a pair of polar opposites: religious and scientific, militarist and pacifist, ecological and industrial. On top of that, you've got your government. This controls your party representation and how much corruption you can get away with. Democracy has the widest free party representation. It is also the most corrupt, because I have no control over my elections. Republics and federations are generally more progressive, offering less representation and more opportunities to correct the result of any rigged election. Dictatorship completely removes the need for underhanded tactics and ensures that all voices are heard and represented by the single party I choose. Every political
This is actually very, very common, is to have false or show elections. The Soviet Union is pretty famous for them. North Korea has them. This is both to appease, sort of provide the window dressing of generally good decorum when you go to, political UN meetings and things like that, right? Your allies want to at least you to have the veneer of being a elected representative government system, but it also serves to, as he discusses, provide an outlet where people feel they have a voice. Now, this comes with a significant liability, is that the unpowered Senate gets to meet and gets constant reminders that they could be making decisions, but don't. And so if they should so choose to overthrow you, or you are killed in a coup, or there's a succession crisis after your natural death, then it means that there is this political body poised to take power, poised and structured. This was the problem in the original US Revolution, is that the crown in London thought that the US was a colony with robust local governance systems, representative houses and elections, and it tolerated these local governance systems, right, that were run by the local population of colonists. But the issue became when the U.S. declared independence. Unlike many other countries that declared independence from colonial rule, the United States had an almost entirely complete governance structure in place at the state level. And they quickly, almost immediately after declaring independence, created a very loose coalition that allowed the states to at least coordinate their efforts. But the important thing is that at the township, county, and state levels, there was already a complete and intact government structure that, by ejecting the crown, very little of people's day-to-day political oversight was lost. And if you want to have a successful or peaceful transition away from a colonial power or remove a dictator, you absolutely must have an existing governance structure that you don't flush out. It's only when you pull a French Revolution and guillotine every single person with authority that you end up in a situation like they had, where another dictator seizes power after a period of tremendous chaos.
Party holding office has representatives. These are not your average man. These are heroes recruited from the academy. But what is the academy? You know how I said dust is currency, and dust is essentially a cloud computing nanite swarm? Now, Imagine smoking it, because the Academy does exactly that. You're hiring nanite-augmented crackheads to rule your empire. These are very diverse in both race and specialization. They each have their own unique and interesting backstory, except Scales. Scales is literally a giant bat that likes to eat zucchini. How is
Into it. Me and Scales are now like this.
she qualified in any way to be my senator? I don't know. But the people love her. And who am I to say no to that smile? So, what's the point of political parties? I'll tell you. It's called legislation. And legislation controls the focus of your empire. You can pass laws respective to each party you have in office. The leading political party also enacts their own automatic policy. Scientists let you research high-tech without unlocking it. Religion gives you the moral high ground to escalate a cold war without legal consequence. Industrialism uses the economy to finance the economy by expanding the economy. How could ecology possibly compete? Well, by giving the public announcement that we don't exactly know how to live on a volcano, so let's do it anyway. Militarist rhetoric not only removes the
Yeah, it's always tough when people are like, what do the ecologists do? What they should do is allow you to do things like terraform or colonize a planet faster, because logically their ability to figure out harmonious ways to live with a planet and the expectation that harmonious living with an existing natural system is favorable. It is interesting. You wonder, one of the chief arguments of modern ecological thinking is that this is the only planet we have. But if that wasn't the case, if there was a diversity of systems, it would require a greater moral framework to understand how to interact with them. A barren volcanic wasteland versus a lush jungle versus a moon like Europa with maybe some life teeming under the seas, but mostly nothing.
Political cost of war, it actively encourages you to go to war with absolutely everyone. And finally, the pacifists can, at any time, without your consent, force you into a state of peace. Passing a law costs influence, depending on the size of your empire. The longer a party stays in power, the more laws you have to choose from. For example, state-enforced eugenics and mandatory
Jesus.
sterilization of other races who aren't your own is a relatively simple law to pass with minimal political experience. Asking everyone to work overtime requires a level of finesse and eloquence only seen in the most Machiavellian of politicians. Unlike many 4X games, Endless Space 2 has quests. Most of these are faction-specific story missions with branching political options to suit your empire. They're quite interesting, they give you something to do, and most of all, they give you permanent upgrades for the rest of the game. You also have multiplayer. How do you play multiplayer? It's quite simple. You all connect to a game, you play for about 50 turns, you forget to make backups of your game, and then everyone collectively desynchronizes. Welcome to Endless Space 2 multiplayer. With all that covered, you've got a general idea of how to play Endless Space 2. Now, let's get to the fun stuff. The factions. There are currently 12 different races to choose. I'm gonna cover them all. The Sophons are
Oh, good.
a race of intellectuals. Despite this, they talk in a British accent. They're
Okay, I feel like it's like a law somewhere that anyone who's highfalutin and intellectual or extra classy, they always get sophisticated British accents. That's why Warhammer 40k warms my heart that the faction with the British accent is actually the orcs. Or at least they have these terrible Cockney accents, and they're the trashiest of all species.
Overdeveloped geckos that love science and hate personal health and safety. The less people know a technology, the faster Sophons can obtain it. If you want a fairly vanilla faction with an easy science victory, go play the Sophonity. Conversely,
Sorry, Link. I can't give credit. Come back when you're a little, richer.
we
That's pretty good.
have a Lumeris, whose entire ethos
Wait, what was that weird tweet? Looking for people who are interested in turning $100 to $4,000. This is not a pyramid scheme. We will be selling crack. I mean, let's be honest. Is crack sort of a pyramid scheme? No, you're actually delivering a service people want. You're meeting a real demand instead of manufacturing demand.
motivation and philosophy can be crystallized in one word.
But in some ways, dealing is very pyramid-like. While it does deliver a product to market, it has a uncomfortably pyramid-like hustle behind it. And that is because you have individuals at the top who receive a cut of the profits of the sales of their network down below. Literally, someone is importing large quantities of illicit substances to the country. It's usually packaged and distributed into smaller quantities, right? And then shipped around the country or the region. And then it is further subdivided. And finally, you have street level dealers. And all of this is to say that from top to bottom, every single level is paying up. So when that street dealer finally sells that $20 hit to some random person, right, they only end up seeing in total a few dollars of profit, usually, $3 to $5. The rest of that money goes all the way back up the chain, up through the previous suppliers. And it does sort of suck, but it's not too different from systems like selling on Amazon, which take actually a comparable cut.
Money. For Volumeris, no problem is too great, as long as you throw piles of money at it. They also have my favorite faction leader.
Commerce, baby. The lifeblood of this and any other galaxy.
Who is probably responsible for every single trade cartel in the known galaxy, and arguably runs more of an economic crime syndicate than a legitimate empire.
The difference is gray. And that's because in the world of transnational banking, transnational commerce, there is no single set of laws people are subject to. You're subject to the law of the country in which you're doing business, but where does Google do business? Well, in some ways in Ireland, in some ways they do business everywhere, which means that, other than Google USA, Google Ireland, Google Indonesia, right, that next tier up, the alphabet itself, they may be headquartered in the United States, but functionally they are a little bit everywhere. And it's one of the things that makes major transnational banks, HSBC, for example, or Bank of America, it makes them really hard to pin down regulatorily.
But I don't care, because Big Titty Fish Mommy is going to buy the galaxy, and I'm gonna help her. If you like making obscene amounts of cash, amphibious mommy milkers, or
Guys, if you're amphibious, you actually lay clutches of eggs. And then a male comes by and fertilizes those eggs, and then they hatch. There's no mommy milking that goes on. There's no mammary glands at work at all. That's mammal. They're central to the process.
Just winning the game by accident. Play Lumeris. Imagine rampant over-industrialization and the fractured ecosystem that follows. Given such dire conditions, what do you think is the most reasonable course of action? You can A. Put all your resources into ecological initiatives and repair the sorry state of your planet, or B. Digitize yourself and become a gaming laptop. The Vodiani chose the second option. Even better, they made a church out of it. Belief is strength. Worship is endless, and heretics are nothing but essence for the harvest. Unlike other races, the Vodiani don't colonize. They travel, they land, and then they harvest. Then we have Horatio.
Come to pry on the most stunning man in the galaxy again?
Originally a wealthy trillionaire, Horatio set
Hashtag trillionaire mindset,
out to find
baby.
his own star system. Along the way, he also found extremely advanced cloning technology, so he made 1 billion copies of the most beautiful and gorgeous person to ever exist, which was of course Horatio. And then Horatio thought to himself, what better than to fill the galaxy with beauty? What better than to fill the galaxy with Horatio? Horatio is concerned with pressing matters such as air conditioning. His government, accordingly, is an eco-fascist dictatorship.
Make Horatio great again.
I mean, here's what I will say about an army of clones. Is one of the things that is dangerous about clones is both cognitively and physically, they are exactly the same. And what do I mean by this? Well, so they're not cognitively exactly the same. But you get into issues where so physically you're exactly the same. This is a problem because diseases or conditions all are going to impact you in the same way. Just like random genetic variation and kind of just random chance affects how someone responds when getting certain a certain variant of the big C19, right? Some people have it worse, some people have it better, some people have comorbidity, some don't, right? And there's a little bit of chance, but there's a lot of genetics to it as well. Similarly to things like obesity, like you may not like it, there's a lifestyle component and it's big, but also there's definitely a genetic component to being prone to becoming obese. High blood pressure, right? You name it. So all that means is that if you have the exact same genetic makeup or the exact same genetic predispositions, then you are stuck with the fact that one disease can wipe out your entire civilization. And the other side that is perhaps more troubling is that you have people have different abilities, right? There is some evidence that things like art, music, do have some sort of baseline genetic basis. There's something that, you will never, like I may never be able to be a Picasso no matter how I was raised or brought up, simply because there are core parts of our being that make people see colors in a certain way, make people experience the vision of a painting in their minds and the desire to create it, right? I don't have that. And so, but there's some things I have that Picasso could never have. And this is sort of the natural, just a variation in human beings, right? And it means that though, if you had a society of nothing but Horatios, even if you found the most brilliant person, they would miss something. There would be some sort of cognitive deficit, even if it's just a perspective, a view of a problem. And it takes different types of mentalities, different mindsets, different views of the world to attack a problem in an unconventional way that other people haven't thought of. And you won't get that if you are a clone surrounded by identical clones. It's the ultimate version of groupthink.
Of course, there are other, less fortunate races than Horatio, but Horatio is not only handsome, he is also brilliant, and thus he finds ways to integrate minority populations by splicing their genetics with Horatio. Yes, many of your less symmetrical friends and family may simply disappear, but know that their memory will live on inside Horatio. Horatio is a classic case of careful who you call ugly in high school, because he just might use the entire galaxy as a glorified eugenics program. The United Empire can be summarized in a single clip. The United Empire is an imperialist, expansionist federation where the will of the emperor is absolute. Any construction, any technology, any luxury he so desires, the empire provides. For the emperor does not ask, he commands.
For the emperor. Wow, this is bordering on copyright, actually.
And the raw influence of his voice can make the impossible into reality. If you want to play not only the most industrious faction, but also the one that generates the most influence just by being industrious, try the United Empire. Propaganda, patriotism, and the greatest of military...
Yeah, wow, that is stolen straight from the Warhammer 40k Imperial Navy.
Industrial complexes await you. Enlist today, service guarantees citizenship. So far, everyone I covered at least have the option of diplomacy. But what if that's just not in your nature?
What do you sound like when you scream?
The Cravers are fucking terrifying. As a leftover bioweapon made by the Virtual Endless, they only have one purpose: consume everything. Any planet with Cravers
Okay, well, they just took the Tyrannid premise and ran with it.
On it has a fixed...
These guys may owe 40k some money, unless 40k stole their IP, which seems 100,000% possible.
Life expectancy, because the Cravers will rip it, strip it, and tear it apart, and then they move on. There is no long-term plan, there is no sustainability, there is no choice but to consume you as well.
We are coming.
Trees. Do you know how fast a tree moves? Not very fast. The Unfallen are a race of trees. They...
Yeah, one of the things that's interesting is that what we don't think about when we think about other life is no one's really sure what sort of incentives and behaviors they will be compelled towards, right? As human beings, we have certain things that just seem hardwired into us. This is the accumulation of resources. This is the desire to engage in sexual activity. Again, I'm not saying every person has these, but human beings, any population of them, will see a large number of these behaviors, these compulsions realized. We definitely have compulsions to eat and sleep at certain intervals, and these sort of drives, these desires, they are fundamental to understanding human beings behaving as a population. But would other life also have these, right? Other life would definitely have a desire to reproduce, right? Well, even that's uncertain because it depends on their lifespan. Do they even reproduce in the way that we're talking about? And, right, so you have to understand that these human analogs, right, that are like, oh, representative democracy. Well, if you were an evolved version of an ant colony, you might think it's comical to have representation when your pheromones or whatever compel you to follow the queen's will, because following her will is ecstatic and to deny it is punitive. But then you're stuck with this other question of, are they really an intelligent species at that point? And you're like, well, what if maybe just the queen is intelligent and everything else is just sort of a drone, right? And what sort of follow-on behaviors to how they would interact with others and how they would view the universe and how they would engage with the world, is that a natural outgrowth, right? Is our view, our dispassionate analysis of ecology or pacifism or conquest, is it intrinsic to life? Is it truly just a cold, calculating logic? Or is there something about the human psyche that makes it view these things as being essential or important?
They speak with a Scottish accent.
Why do you pester the heart with your petty needs?
Much like the Scottish, trees are rooted to the ground. They don't do much, and their only way of winning the game is to ask you politely, do you know how they colonize other planets? They need to slowly, delicately, without interruption, entwine them with celestial vines and hope or pray that they didn't start next to cravers. If you enjoy pressing and turn and being a vegetable, you'll enjoy playing the Unfallen. Imagine being an ostrich. Now, imagine evolving to the point where you're used as arena blood sports for the entertainment of an advanced, decadent civilization. Then,
ostriches seem fucking crazy.
that civilization gets wiped out. You get your freedom and form a tribalistic society of samurai ostriches. Then you accidentally stab your katana through a giant ship, and suddenly you're a major faction. The Hisho were added with the Supremacy DLC, together with the main source of tears and salt on the Endless Space 2 forums, Behemoths. Behemoths are multi-purpose capital-class ships. They can support the bureaucracy, plutocracy, or theocracy, accelerate genocide, accommodate homicide, extract resources in a remote situation, and even terraform planets for improved habitation. They can do anything. That's why they're insanely expensive and you get very few of them. But that's not why people got upset. They got upset because the Behemoth is a precursor to something a little more concerning. A planet killer is morally dubious, leaves millions of grieving survivors, and generally causes public unrest. A system killer accelerates a megaton nuclear payload directly at the sun, causing it to expand into a red supergiant as the core collapses and begins to fuse hydrogen. In a single nanosecond, all life in that solar system is gonna need some SPF 70 sunscreen. The Obliterator.
Yeah, okay, these are crazy weapons, but maybe theoretically possible to hijack a system like this, though you get into weird physics problems when you're talking about this much energy or matter being pumped into something.
Is a system killer.
Though it is worth it to acknowledge that in a planetary system, for example, here in our solar system, the sun is like 8 light minutes away from Earth. So the rays that hit us, those photons originated in the sun 8 minutes prior to them hitting us. And I'm saying that it's not really like that. Okay, so relativity says that they arrived at the same instance depending on your frame of reference. And from our frame of reference, from our frame of reference, it's still instantaneous. It's complicated.
Which is made by upgrading a behemoth, and prior to many updates and patches, had no effect on public relations. I found this incredibly entertaining. Because the missile actually has to travel to its destination, it often took several turns for enemy players to see the ball of light quickly approaching their home system. At this point, you will notice something: the chat functionality, inside which you will see a stream of colorful messages calling you a number of racial slurs, after which the player will mysteriously disconnect and add you as a friend on Steam. Even after numerous nerfs, the Hisho stand tall. For the Hisho, combat isn't just about winning, it's about honor, which they call Kai because they're a race of weeaboo samurai chickens. The more honorable your actions, the more Kai you generate, the more obedient your empire. And if it ever falls too low, just remember, Aztec blood sacrifices are a great way of gaining popularity. Vaulters are the DLC race.
Gotta love it. Again, this is something that we talked about, but even within humanity, right? So in pre-modern times, right? We're talking about 500 BC, or let's say let's say the world of 500 BC. Okay, there are civilizations, a lot, that never talk to each other. They experience no diffusion of technology. Now, obviously, Europe and Asia are connected by a land bridge. So technology, the bronze working, for example, or the use of money, of individual currencies, these good ideas tend to percolate, right, place by place, mile by mile, year by year, as peoples encounter them and adopt them. But that's not true of a lot of other places. There are places in the world that were so disconnected, right, that they actually evolved in totally separate ways. Aboriginal culture in Australia, for example, and many of the Pacific Islands. But primarily, one of the most fascinating is the culture that emerged in North and South America. That's because this was an entire for about 10,000 years, this entire cultural norm, all of these different ways of solving fundamental human problems of eating, sleeping, having an organized society, enforcing laws, right, were solved with a totally different set of inputs and no chance for technological diffusion from Eurasia. And so you ended up with really different cultural norms. For example, the Aztec, even as late as the Aztecs, so the equivalent who were at their zenith around the Middle Ages, the late Middle Ages, they never used the wheel as a labor-saving device. Children's toys would have wheels, but they were never adopted as a labor device, right? They were never thought to attach them to beast of burden, to move them back and forth. And it's actually, believe the thinking was that there was some sort of value in laboring without assistance, that mechanical aids were somehow wrong, mechanical aids of this sort. But they evolve culture differently, and one of the biggest things that was different was their sense of sacrifice. There was individual sacrifice, the individual spilling their blood through intentional self-mutilation and wounding. There was also, of course, the sacrifice of captives, and there was a whole culture around this that is not really that well understood relative to Western culture, unfortunately, because the conquistadors arrived and they, coexisted with those cultures for a few decades, but eventually eliminated them. And so much of the information that we would want to know about them, about the deep layers of their extremely complex society, are sort of lost to history. And we're only trying our best to make trying to make our best guesses as to how they thought about the world around them, how they interacted with each other. What's fascinating too is that there's some things that were commonalities. They had empires that rose and fell. They traded for goods, and controlling valuable resources was a way to build out a giant empire. They raised armies and went to war. All things that tell us that even though with no Eurasian input, they still came to these same solutions, right? They had whole merchant classes. They had hierarchies, right? With someone sitting atop them, an elite upper class and a merchant class and a laboring class and a warrior class, all things that would have been totally familiar to someone in China or Europe at the same time.
Designed to completely
But they came up with it without any input from those sides.
validate the Sophons, because for vaulters, location is no issue. We've got portals for that. Disconnected system with no clear star lane, even better. The typical vaulter player will usually fuck off to the four corners of a galaxy and quietly win a science victory before we can even find them. Also, their mothership, the Argosy, can be used as a two-way portal. I very much enjoy parking outside an enemy system, warping in my obliterator, and cooking them instantaneously. The Riftborn are Tetris blocks from another universe, which is currently overrun with super aids. In a last act of desperation, the Riftborn entered our universe. To them, it's a dystopian reality filled with all manner of squirming, wriggling creatures that piss and shit everywhere. From their perspective, they just took a one-way ticket to hell. However, they don't judge. They just want to survive. Unlike us, Riftborn aren't born. They're made in the construction queue. Otherwise, they work a lot like us, except in reverse. Terrestrial planet, I sleep. 1,000-degree lava planet with no trace of life, real shit. Colonize immediately. Hey, it's a race of abstract geometric polygons. Give them a break. Luckily, they can also break reality by compressing or dilating the flow of time. And if you've ever been to a college fraternity, you'll have no problem pronouncing their names. The second last DLC, Penumbra,
Okay, that's a fun one, but all right.
introduced a controversial mechanic: hacking. It's a nice way to grab intel, sabotage enemy systems, and of course, accidentally turn a Craver government into a pacifist dictatorship. With that, they also added the Umbral Choir. The Umbral Choir is an immaterial, intergalactic wraith with good intentions. Like a ghost in the machine, the Umbral Choir spreads by hacking absolutely everything. Every transmission is tapped, every system is compromised, and we have no trace of who did it, because the Umbral Choir doesn't want to be found. How do you fight something you can't see? How do you stop something that's already inside the wire? And if it's already inside the wire, then how do you know it isn't inside you already? Honestly, they're extremely fun to play, especially when your friends mouse over a system and ask why half of their GDP keeps disappearing into the Craver pension fund. Finally, it's a good time to talk about the last DLC, Awakening, which adds the Nakalim, a fairly interesting religious faction that I personally enjoyed, but also adds the Academy as a separate AI-controlled faction. Now, let me tell you why that's a problem, because the leader of the Academy, bear with me, I don't know how to pronounce his name, because Isandir takes territory which he doesn't need away from players. He can also enter your territory, destroy your fleets, and siege your planet.
This is sort of weird to just have a gigantic troll AI, but as we've discussed, it happens sometimes in these sort of interstate warfare, right? There's oftentimes a larger state that has much greater power that can choose to intervene, but doesn't. The Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta had Persia hanging over it. Persia was powerful enough to wipe out both of those city-states, and courting Persia and avoiding its intervention in turn was a tremendous, tremendous part of understanding the Peloponnesian War. Maybe. Oh, Lord.
But Lord forbid you manage to sink one of Isandir's ships, which, by the way, are stronger than any other faction. That's an act of aggression, and he's going to ask you to pay reparations. Small side note, if you're getting harassed and abused by Isandir and you want him to stop, you can't. Until you discover the location of the Academy, you can't even do diplomacy. Now, let's say you forgive all that. You're open-minded, and you're wondering, what's the point of a new Academy?
I am once again asking for your financial support.
Every 10 turns, Isandir will ask for your most generous financial contribution to the Academy. The highest contributions will get their preferred position within the Academy. After another 10 turns,
I am once again asking for your financial support.
Also, he's been expertly programmed to forget any positive relations you had before, which may
Yeah, this is also okay. This is one of the things that people don't understand about international relations that really bothers me is that without an enforcement mechanism, an agreement or a favor doesn't apply. There is no you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours later. Friends don't show up for absolutely no reason. They just don't do it. Right? You have to have an incentive in the future, a future reason. And don't get me wrong, if you don't help us, we will fucking stab you in the throat is a valid incentive to induce that behavior now. But so is things like, if you don't help us, we will get eliminated. And if you are a future potential rival, your allies may just be like, you guys see anything? Nah.
May surprise you, since he'll go back to neutral and start attacking you. Better pay up, because you can't contribute to the academy until you've paid reparations. If you try to take his home system, he'll demand you give it back and pay reparations. Who the fuck made this shit? Oh right, it's not even the same studio. They outsourced this.
I'm from Buenos Aires, and I say kill them all! Yeah!
All the other DLC up until Penumbra, fantastic. Love it. Awakening is about $13 you can spend to make the game worse. It's such garbage that even if I got it for free, I'd still ask for a refund. We could talk hours about strategy, metagame, and the eternal question we always return to. Is Endless Space 2 balanced? No, it is not. There are many mods to try and fix this, but ultimately, part of what makes this game so interesting is the element of randomness, forcing you to adapt and overcome the circumstances to the best of your ability.
This is the real world, man. This is unfortunately the real world. It is not balanced. Countries start off with different resources, right? Some cultures just garner and are more power oriented, right? Some people are just pricks. Some countries just are pricks, right? Or their governance is, they're more authoritarian. They have different resources. They have different population concentrations. They have different stuff to work with, right? There is no fairness in the reality. The dirty, messy reality is that things are hard.
There's many players out
and it's not fair
there who will constantly demand you remake the game, citing that they don't have an optimal 5-planet system adjacent to them and can't possibly compete. If you don't, they disconnect. The equivalent of this is being born on planet Earth to a middle-class family and immediately committing suicide to try and re-roll for better RNG, because if I can't be born as the son of a wealthy Middle Eastern sheikh, I may as well not be born. Endless Space 2 is a wonderfully designed and beautifully made game with such a level of pace and intrigue that I actually bought a legal copy. I've played it for 2 years and I still keep coming back. It satisfies every tick box I ever wanted for a civilization game in space. It's enjoyable and relaxing both in single player and in multiplayer. You're probably going to desynchronize before anyone actually gets angry. I like the music and I enjoy amphibious mommy milkers.
I'm so bothered. I'm so bothered by this completely inaccurate. By the way, I know she's an alien, so she can have mammary glands and still be an amphibian. Sort of. We would just probably, in Earth terms, we'd probably just call her a mammal and say she has amphibian characteristics.
I give Endless Space 2 an extremely high score. I am also issuing a public fatwa against anyone responsible for the Awakening DLC. This time, there's no discount, because my inside man had a talk with Sega. Their formal response? Fuck off. So I recommend waiting for a sale, buying on discount, or using other legal methods of purchase that I am not yet aware of. As always...
Oh man, good old Seth. Guys, you gotta love Seth's commitment to, well, being honest and trying to do affiliate marketing, which frankly he deserves, right? I mean, I actually love the fact that he generally profiles games that he loves. I think that's a great way to do it. I'm all about the positive content. Guys, if you want more of my positive content, or sometimes cynical, bitter content, whatever, you want to become a Patreon member. Thanks to our Lieutenant tier patrons: Cole Foster, Command Unit, Caffeinated, Jakob Flavius, Chris, Dr. Shadowcop, Portal World, and Time. They have access to an exclusive room on the Discord and exclusive content, exclusive videos. So, also, if you want to come join me, hang out on Twitch, twitch.tv/combatvetpaul. Link to all this stuff is in the description, and I'll see you guys next time.